another episode of Anyone Can Paint. We're going to pick right back up where we left off last week. We just finished getting the bushes in before we had to leave for the week. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in some snow to this bluish white to cover up the bottom edge of that, because I got some little fuzzy edges, which is going to typically happen. So I'm just going to grab some white, a little bit of blue, and something close to what is on there is fine. You don't have to match it exactly. But I'm just going to go around the bottom of this and just kind of straighten that up a little bit. Again, don't worry about being straight and being perfect, because that's the snow. I'm going to grab a little bit more, be right back up. And I'm just dressing up the bottom edges of this. Just like if this was a summer scene, we would be putting highlights on it, and that would cover up the bottom edges. But because we're going to be putting snow back here, and it's not going to be very bright, because remember our light source is coming from the back to the front. So there, something like that, just enough to cover that up. And then you're good to go. Now I'm going to clean out the brush. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to start working on that little farm scene that's going to be back in the distance. This is going to be back in the middle ground area, and it's going to be in front of these bushes. We're going to have just a couple, 3 buildings that are back there. So I'm going to get the small flat brush. Remember, you always get your brush wet before you get it into the paint. And I'm going to make a pretty dark color. This is going to be some blue and some brown. And I'm just going to get this to be kind of like a chocolate brown color. Doesn't have to be exact. It just needs to be dark. And then we're going to come back here. Now this is where you just start establishing where you want your buildings to go. And we'll put the roof on there now after we're done with this part. But this is going to go something like this. And this is going to be the front side of a building. And now whether this is a house or the barn, however you would like to make yours, that's totally up to you. This is going to be a bit of a side. Now this will make much more sense when I get the roof part on there, and then we'll put a little bit of highlight in and stuff. And there's another building that's going to be back here. And if you change the area that you put your buildings in, so for example, you can see that this one sits here, that one goes further back. That's again one of those illusion things that makes the other building sit way back in there. And then I'm going to put one more in that's over on this side. This is going to go something like this. And there's going to be like a little extension that comes out. Again, I know that kind of looks a little funny. It kind of looks like a car. Until we get the roof lines on, then it will start to make sense. You can go ahead and clean out your brush. Then I'm going to grab some white and a touch of some blue. And if you still got a little bit of that, I had some of that when I just cleaned up the bottom of our bushes. Now, because this paint's wet, and maybe at home it'd be a good thing for you to dry this part of your cabin, or I'm sorry, your houses and the barns and things. So I may get a little bit of the brown in there, but I will go back and touch it up later. But this will just kind of get this established. So the roof is going to go like this. And then it comes down on an angle. And again, hopefully this will start to make more sense to you. And you can see I picked up a little bit of brown, but again, I'm not going to be concerned about that right now. And again, remember, these are further away, so you don't want an enormous amount of detail to these. I'm just grabbing more paint, and I'm going to put a little bit of a roof on this one back here. And then I'm going to put a roof on this one that's left. This one's going to kind of go like that. And when you put this white on, you want to kind of put it on a little bit thick, because remember, this is still representing some snow. And again, you can see how I'm picking up some of the brown, so make sure you dry that part really well. with that color still there, I'm going to grab a little bit more blue. And again, this is going to be similar to what the underpainting color is. And I'm just going to kind of shore up the bottom edge of this. Now, this is where, if you want to, you can always make your buildings a little bit taller, knowing that you can paint the snow up underneath them and you can shrink the size of them. So that way, they're pretty much going to be how they are, but you can shrink the height of your buildings. And I'll give you an example, like right here. So let's say I want to make, that's a little bit too tall. So I'm just going to go across and see how it shortens it up already. Then I got an angle that's over here. And then back here, you can paint up on the bottom edge of that. And again, that just shortens the buildings up and helps to push them back a little bit. And again, I would suggest that you kind of wait for yours to dry or force it dry so you don't pick up all this little bit of brown and things that I'm picking up. But I'll go back and re-highlight those a little bit later. I'm going to grab a little bit of brown in with that white and blue that we were just using. Now I'm going to put a little bit of highlight on this so you can tell the difference between the side and the front here. So I'm just going to make this, and I'm just suggesting, I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. And I'm going to put some dark back in. I'm just lightly touching the canvas. That kind of helps put a little dimension to that, so now you can see the front and the side. And we're going to clean out our brush. Then we're going to switch to a liner brush. Now what we're going to put on here is, I'm going to put a chimney on here, but I'm going to wait for that white to dry. But we're going to put some little fence posts, like maybe around this area is a little fence line. So I'm going to switch to my liner brush. Remember to get it wet. Now this color is going to be kind of dark. So with that color that we used to establish the buildings to begin with, that's the color we'll use for this. Now you want to make sure that you get this nice and soupy. Remember, that's how that works with the liner brush. You got to get it really thinned out and put some water with it. And then if you come down here, now I don't know how well you can see the print that's on the side of the brush, but you want to put your brush right in there and you want to twist your brush, and that's how you load it up. And then you continue to twist, and then you pull out, and that will help get your brush to a nice little edge on there. And then you're going to come up, and we're going just to establish however you want your fence line to go. If you want it to come from back here, that it comes out and goes across, then back, you can do that. Maybe that's what I'll do, just show you how you can do that. So what I like to do is to establish the ones that's going to be closest to me so I can establish a height. And then you know from there you just need to make them shorter as you go back. So maybe we'll put one there and there. And again, you don't want these to be big time fat huge because these are still further away. So let's assume that that's going to be the front side. And now as I want them to angle back, what you want to do is you want to start making these shorter as you go. And then also you want to change the length of this. So you can see here this is longer, so it looks like it's closer than what that one is. So if you continue with that, and you continue to make these shorter, you'll trick the eye to think that those go further back. And then they just kind of fade out, because you want them to get progressively smaller. Back here is going to be the same way. Like, this is an interesting corner here, because the fence posts here are actually going to go in between those. It's going to do soon, or it's going to look. So you want to bring that down. Again, that's shorter in the canvas than what that one is, so it kind of gives that appearance that it goes further back. And then they just get smaller and smaller and smaller. So then it looks like you got the whole little compound kind of fenced in. Now I'm going to take a piece of paper towel and I'm going to try to get a little bit more of the bulk of the paint out of my brush. And I'm just going to use a piece of paper towel, and I'm just going to put my brush in there, and I'm going to twist it just like I was loading it. And all I'm doing is getting some of the bulk paint out of there so it doesn't kind of bulk up on me so much. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to suggest maybe some barbed wire that goes through here. Again, you don't need much paint for this. You just want to give a suggestion. Especially up here, you want it to see a little bit more because this is the part of the fence that's the closest to you. And it goes right over here to the corner. Now we're going to start angling back. This is where you don't have to make a complete stroke all the time. You can just kind of suggest it. It just kind of fades away. You can also kind of hit it with your finger, and that lifts some of the paint up so it's just not so distinct. Kind of calms it down a little bit. We'll do the same thing over here. Again, just little suggestions, really light stroke, just again to suggest. That's all you got to do. All right, we'll clean out the brush. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and straighten up using that small flat brush again. I'm going to try and get the roof all set so we can get set ourselves up for putting the little chimney in there. So I want to kind of get this brown out of here again. So I'm just going to lightly go over that. That one still seems a little wet. So we won't worry about that one. That one's going to be pretty good. Then we'll set our chimney in there. And I'll show you how you can make a little bit of smoke coming out of the chimney, which is a very simple, very cool thing. All right, now I'm going to go back to my liner brush. Now I'm going to go in and put a little indication of some snow there, maybe on the tops of those posts, maybe a little bit that we can go across on our bobbed wire a little bit. So I'm going to grab some white, and I'm going to take a little bit more of this blue. And again, you need to kind of juice it up a little bit. You want to twist your brush in there. That's how you load a liner brush up. Then you want to pull it out, get it to a nice little point. And again, back here, these are not very big, so you just want to come up and just kind of touch to suggest some snow there on the top of those posts. Again, you want to start with the ones that are the closest to you because that's the most amount of paint that you have on your brush. And then as you go back, just lightly touch it until it goes away. Again, you can just lightly touch your finger and that will just knock the intensity and the amount of paint that's on there. Same thing with back here. Then while I've got that, I'm going to go across the fence line just to suggest. Now hopefully you can see that. But it just looks really good against this lighter blue combination for our underpainting for the snow. And this is where we angle back. And this just kind of fades away. And just adjust. Yeah, that's all you got to do. I'm going to use my liner brush to see if I can get this covered a little bit more while I'm back here. There, okay. We'll clean out the brush. Now I'm going to put the chimney in on this one. We're going to assume that that's the house. So I'm going to go back to that dark color that we had earlier. And it's still pretty juicy, so I'm just going to go with that. Remember to pull that out so you get a straight edge. And maybe it's a good thing, too, to kind of run that across the piece of paper towel just to get the bulk out, because you don't need a whole lot of paint on your liner brush for this. And we're going to come right back up to here. There we go. Something like that. Then I'm going to clean out the brush. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. If you've got a small brush and you want to actually use the end of your handle, and you can just get into a little bit of white and just want to tap that in like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put this right on the top of the chimney. Then you go in with your finger and kind of smudge it. And hopefully this will work out. Now one of the things you can do is that if you're really not confident is have a piece of paper towel with you. Now assuming that this is dry, and hopefully yours will be when you do this, you can touch it on top of there, and if it ends up putting a spot that's too big, you can just wipe it off while it's wet. But you just want to suggest just a little touch like there, and then you get your finger. Now this is going to be hard to see, so I'm going to get out of the way. And depending on how you want your smoke to travel, just put your finger there right into it and smudge it. Now that went kind of thick, so you can just go over it, just like that. You get a little bit of smoke coming out of there. Now of course I wiped out some of my chimney because it's still wet, so I'm just going to go establish that back in. Then you get that, just that little indication of some of the smoke coming out. That just helps bring a little bit of life to the buildings. Makes it a little bit interesting. All right, I think we're done with the liner brush for now. The next thing we're going to do is, I think we're going to start putting some highlights on our little river that's going through. Now remember, we talked about last week about the importance of making sure your lines and your strokes are horizontal when you want something to appear like it's laying flat. And it's important when you do it here for your underpainting, but boy, it's really important when you do it for your highlights, because again, maybe what I'll do is I'll show you how this works. If you put it on an angle, it'll start to look like it's tilted. And I'll just have a piece of paper towel to wipe it off so we can straighten it back out. But I'll give you an example of what this can be like. So I'm going to grab some white, a little bit of blue. You want to get your brush to a chiseled edge, and you recall how we've done this in the past, is that when you got your color blended, you just put your brush into it and you pull it through. You turn it over, stick your brush in the paint again, and pull it through again. And you can see how that gives you a nice little sharp edge to work with. And that's what you want to get, that nice little sharp edge right there. All right, let's go back here. And let's go up in this foreground area so it's a little bit easier to see. Now I'm going to show you strokes that are not horizontal, and you'll notice right away how that looks like it's tilted. See how that makes your water look like it's slanted? That's not what you want to do. It's really important to make sure that those are going nice and horizontal and straight. So I'm going to reload the brush. I'm going to let that dry, so I'm going to start back here. Now we can bring the snow up a little bit higher on this stuff, so if you just want to suggest when you come back here. But again, notice that the brush is staying horizontal. Now you can come down like this all you want, as long as your brush is positioned straight. And don't cover up all your dark. Now probably a little bit later when we start putting highlights on the snow, I'm going to reflect some of that color into the highlights on the river also. Now this is going to represent one of two things. It depends on how you want to interpret it, or maybe someone who's looking at your painting will. Is that this could be frozen and maybe there's been some snow that's drifted over it. Or it could also look like it's still thawed out and maybe just got a little bit of a current to it. So again, it's all in how you want to make that appear and how you want to interpret that. What I've often done, I've told this to my students, is that when we've done a painting maybe similar to this, and they'll say, is that river frozen? And I immediately will say, what's it look like to you? And they'll say, well, I think it's frozen. And I say, yep, exactly right. Or if they say, well, it looks like it's not frozen, but it's got a little bit of current to it. Just however they want to interpret that. And I don't even know in my mind that I have it preferred one way or another. I just reloaded the brush again. Stay with your horizontal strokes. Again, you remember last week when we were first putting underpainting in here, this is a quick way of checking. So what you would have done is back here when you made your first couple strokes, is to put your brush handle up against that, and that will let you know the indication of if your strokes are staying fairly horizontal. And if not, you want to stop right then and change it before you do the whole thing and have to underpaint the whole thing over and re-highlight it. Again, just kind of keep moving around without covering up all your underpainting. And like I said, when we start putting some of the highlights in the snow, to incorporate some of the pinks and things, we'll incorporate some of that in the water also. All right, let's clean out that brush. Now there's some parts on mine that I didn't cover very well, so I want to get a little bit thicker paint back there on that. This is some white and blue, and I'm just going to kind of go over this just to make sure it's covered very well. And this, you can do this fairly quick. Just kind of keep it with the same color you have. Now maybe yours is not very thin. I'm always in a hurry to kind of get the thing covered and keep moving on, but this is just a little bit too thin. So again, I'm just grabbing some white and some blue and just going to add some more. Now that's a lot bluer than what that is that I had up there, and it's not a big deal. You can just grab some white and go right over that and just work that in. It's not a big deal at all. Again, don't really focus so much on your brush strokes as it is that you want to get your canvas covered. Now, whenever you're going to apply more color to an underpainting, you really want to make sure your underpainting is dry first. And this will happen to you if you've ever put underpainting down and you were like, oh, I need to make it darker or I need to make it lighter or whatever. And if you put your first layer on fairly thin, what can happen is that as that's starting to dry and set up, when you put wet paint on paint that's starting to set up, so you got your first layer is starting to dry and you put wet paint on top of that, what often happens is you'll end up lifting up that first layer that's really thin, and then you'll end up getting a white spot. And so then you think, well, I need to get more paint on there. So the more paint you put on there, the more it's lifting, and your white spot starts growing and growing. So the best thing to do is let it stop, let it dry. You can force it dry with a hair dryer, whatever you'd like to do, but you really need to let that dry before you try to cover it back up, because again, it's not going to work really well. I'm going to go over here and put on a little bit more over here too. I'm just going to reload and I'll be right back, and I'm just grabbing some white and blue and blending it right up here. I'm going to do a little bit more. You can kind of see it's kind of thin back there too. And just work that right down towards the river. Again, just as long as you've got the canvas covered fairly well. Don't worry about areas being a little bit darker blue than others. That's not that important. All right, let's clean out that brush. Well, one of the things you can do while I'm thinking about this little building, the buildings back here, I'm sorry that I'm flopping back and forth between brushes, but I just now thought about this. If you just get a little bit of white on your liner brush, and again, you might want to take some of the bulk off of this, but especially when you have a dark building, if you want to just suggest a little bit of maybe some snow or some ice that's hanging down, you can pull some of that down right from the roof line down. Again, it's just a little bit more detail, but kind of looks kind of nice. It kind of helps with that wintry, cold look. Again, that's up to you if you want to do that or not. Alrighty. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to apply some of the highlights on the snow. Now, let me kind of caution you about this. It's really easy, and I fall victim to this all the time. Is you'll start putting on highlights, and then you got to have a little bit of a discipline and a willpower to go like, okay, enough's enough. And if you ever, you've always heard the saying, where you don't want to put on a whole lot of less is more. That really applies to painting often. So you don't want to cover up all of your blue. In fact, it's just the opposite. You're just going to kind of enhance where maybe some little mounds or little hills are at, and we're going to leave the rest of this primarily the way it is. So you can use your medium flat brush or your small brush, whatever you like to use, but this is going to be some white and a little bit of red. And I'm just going to check that up against what I got. That's pretty close. I'm going to add a little bit more white to it. But this is going to be a dry brush technique, which we have done oftentimes. And what that means is that once you've got your color and you've got your brush loaded, what you want to do is get a piece of paper towel and just kind of wipe some of that out of your paper towel, or off onto the paper towel, because you don't want to put this on where it's real thick and bulky. And then you want to hold your brush like the Statue of Liberty holds her torch. And you're going to come up and you're actually going to be scrubbing with the side of the brush. And this is really, really light, and you don't want to use a whole lot of pressure. And just kind of skim on the top of that. And by just doing a little bit, especially on the top part of that, and then work it down into where a little hill is. See how that gives an indication that there's a little bit of a hill? And what tricks the eye is because you've got a light against a dark. And what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate some of these throughout this area. And you can use a light amount of pressure. You can put a little bit more pressure down. It really is going to depend on how much paint you ended up taking out of your brush. But just kind of work this around. Just wherever you want to have an indication of like a little bit of an elevation change. Now I'm going to reload, and I'll be right back up. Kind of dab off some of that, and then go up here really lightly and just start applying a little bit more in there. And you just really have to do the top of the little hill and just work it down into the hill and let it fade away. So I'm going to grab some more. You're going to have to reload often because remember you're wiping some of the paint out of your brush. So this is just one of those things you just have to keep working it. You can change the shapes of your mountains. Remember, this is snow. Back here, you just want to give small indications, not a whole lot, because remember, that's further away. But you can see we're not even using any white in our snow. It's just that pink color that's kind of reflecting off of the sky. And of course, some of my white and blue was a little bit wet from when I went back and put a little bit more of the underpainting in. And I need to make up another little batch. Now we're not going to be able to finish this week, so next week when we come back, we're going to pick right up, and this will be where we continue the process of putting highlights on. Again, the top edge, this is very similar to how we do rocks, how you establish that outer edge, and then you want to work that color back into a rock, or in this case a hill, so you can establish the hill. And this is about, and I got that darn fly again, this is where we're going to have to stop this week. Thank you so much for watching this week. I really appreciate that you take time out of your day to kind of tune us in. Remember to visit the website. There's a ton of information that can help you get started. I can give you a lot of ideas on how you can get started. If you have questions or comments, email me or call me. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.